Morning, everyone. I want to thank everybody for being here this morning. I want to thank my colleagues for joining us and taking part in this event. We're extremely fortunate to be joined by some experts in the field of human trafficking and by those who have done truly heroic work on behalf of the victims. Thanks to many of my colleagues who are wearing blue today. January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month, and wearing blue is one symbol to help raise the awareness regarding human trafficking. And many of our colleagues and friends are doing just that today. Human trafficking is one of those things that truly we find hard to believe. We can't conceive that it's happening close to our homes, our schools, our neighborhoods, our churches, or even in our own families. But the fact is, whether we want to think about it or not, it is happening right here in Pennsylvania. It's not limited to the largest cities or just our national borders. It's happening all across the country and in every corner of the state in communities like all of ours. I live in southern Lancaster County, as many of you know, and my district that I'm privileged to represent is known for its rich rural history and agricultural community. Truth is, Route 30 also runs through the district. And you can ask anyone who studies the issue, and the Route 30 corridor is one of the areas and is a huge target for law enforcement trying to crack down on this horrible scourge on society. And as you can tell by the regions of the state represented here behind me by the members of the legislature and around me today, and those who will likely be speaking on the bills as they move, this issue is happening everywhere. Children, women, and men held against their will, forced into a life of abuse, feeling like there's nowhere to go and no one is there to help. Today, we are answering that call for help. The House will advance a package of bills designed to crack down on those perpetuating this horrific practice, give law enforcement more tools in the fight, and arguably, most importantly, improve and expand services to help victims so that they can break free, find happiness and freedom that we all deserve. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to some of our guests who have personal knowledge in helping some of the victims that we are talking about. And I will first turn it over to Mary Quinn, who's president and CEO of the YWCA, who has a history of working with some of these victims. Thank you.
Thank you. The YWCA here locally of Greater Harrisburg has been serving this community for over 125 years. We have been at the forefront of some of society's most pressing social justice issues, from voting rights to civil rights. We believe in creating a more just community for all. Nationally, YWCAs are known for their services of domestic violence and sexual assault. We are the largest service provider of those services, and we consider ourselves experts in the field of victim services. So in 2014, we ventured out, utilizing our expertise in victim services to want to build awareness about human trafficking. It started out as a bystander awareness. We want people to understand that human trafficking is not like the movie Taken. People are not just simply snatched off the street. They are often the people who won't be missed in society. They have past criminal histories, drug abuse, domestic violence abuse. They are the ones perhaps in unlikely or unstable immigrant status. So all of these issues, we really wanted to build that awareness for individuals along the Route 15 corridor. So we were serving counties, 12 counties from the border state of New York all the way down to Maryland. And what surprised us was the number of victims that we actually identified. Since that time, we have identified almost 300 victims. And what has been striking to us is the level of trauma that a human trafficking victim has seen in their lifetime. We know that once a victim is within human trafficking, they have a lifespan of about 7 years. This is different than what we were used to working with in terms of domestic violence. National statistics show that there are repeated rapes from 9,000 to 14,000 in a year, and our own experience with victims corroborates that statistic. We see women and men and children, and it is astounding to know. I fear for these individuals, the trauma they have experienced, and our ability to work with them is challenging. And so I'm so pleased that there's more awareness being built locally, because it does happen. The majority of our victims, 75% of them, have been picked up, usually by law enforcement, within the Harrisburg area. So we know they're being trafficked from all over the state. Pennsylvania is number 10 in the country in terms of reported human trafficking cases. So it's a real issue, and I'm so happy to be invited here today to speak about the work that the YW does, and to know that there's a community that supports us and comes together to address these really critical issues. So thank you.
Thank you, Mary. As she detailed, and I hope those numbers show, it really is surprising at the volume that we're talking about. And as Mary indicated, oftentimes the victims are found through interactions with law enforcement. We have Dave Sunday here, who is from York County and is a district attorney, and is going to talk a little bit about his experiences in this. I want to thank Senator Kristen Phillips-Hill for inviting him, who also has a bill that recently came out of the Senate, which we'll also be discussing, and I appreciate her being here to support this initiative as well. Dave?
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here with so many champions for victims. I first saw human trafficking in the form of a young lady who was arrested in York County. She was in a home, and she was initially arrested for dealing heroin. The heroin that she delivered resulted in the death of a young man who overdosed and was thrown into a snowbank outside of the house. She was ultimately arrested because what happened was she was sitting inside the door, and she would hand heroin to the individuals that would walk inside the house. She would take the money, and then that was it. And so through the course of the investigation, she was identified as the person that gave that heroin. As the investigation continued, we spoke with our victim advocates in the office. We spoke with the defense attorney that represented her, and what we realized was that there was a far more nefarious action that was going on here. And what we realized was that she wasn't even from York. She had a daughter that she hadn't seen in years. She sat inside that home, and what she did was she handed heroin to people. She took the money, and then she gave it to someone else. She gave it to a few other people. Those other people were the drug traffickers that originally found her in New Jersey and trafficked her to York. They then utilized her to hand the drugs to people. They took the money from her, and in return, they would give her a little piece of the drugs. We spoke with her, and what we realized was that she was truly a victim. There was accountability that had to occur, but at the same time, we worked with her. We spoke with her. We identified that she had potential other issues at play that needed to be dealt with through counseling, through treatment. And also, she aided us in charging and arresting the individuals that trafficked that heroin from New Jersey, or actually from New York to York County. And I think that's a critical story to understand, because that's how this often happens. We have a young lady who ended up here. She was being used, and as a result of that, we ultimately were able to get her into treatment, and she was reunited with her family, with her daughter. She's now working on an associate's degree, and I think it's important for us to understand that. The previous speaker indicated that it's not like the movie Taken, and it's not. And this is an example of that. She very easily almost went to jail for a very long time, but through working with her and an understanding of the fact that she is a victim, we were able to get the true evil behind that plot. Human trafficking is an absolutely horrendous crime where people profit from the exploitation of children, adolescents, and adults. It occurs when one person manipulates another person into sex acts in exchange for something of value, such as food, money, shelter, or drugs. Who are the victims of human trafficking? They're from all walks of life. They're people like your neighbors and your friends and your family. Oftentimes, they're opioid addicts who are in the throes of addiction, and they're just trying to get their next fix. These vulnerabilities open up the door to sexual exploitation. Perpetrators coerce their victims into prostitution through violence, threats, and drug addiction. Women are held hostage and forced to sell their bodies and turn the earnings over to their traffickers, like we saw in the case that I just highlighted for you. These individuals may actually get victims addicted to heroin and cut off their supply as a means of insidious control. They prostitute these young ladies to work off drug debts. They look, again, just like your neighbors and friends. And the perpetrators of human trafficking intentionally prey upon those that oftentimes are the weakest and the most vulnerable amongst us. People that are often homeless, children living in foster care, victims of physical or sexual abuse, those living in poverty, undocumented immigrants, children, youth, adults living with intellectual disabilities or mental illness, and those suffering from the horrors of addiction. In reality, human trafficking is just another form of interpersonal violence. It contains the same power and control dynamics as an abusive relationship, the same grooming tactics that we see with regard to sexual abuse, and just like any other unhealthy relationship, it can take several attempts before a victim is finally able to leave. Getting enough evidence to make an arrest in sex trafficking cases are often an uphill battle. These crimes are increasingly difficult to detect and prosecute because victims often do not even see themselves as victims. The high cost of investigating cases, the emergence of online and social media technologies that expand those traffickers' reach, and obstacles in getting witnesses to testify against their traffickers are all difficulties. And I will tell you that although the horrific nature of these crimes may sometimes trigger a knee-jerk reaction, in Pennsylvania, our lawmakers have effectuated thoughtful legislative responses that provide prosecutors the tools that we need to attack the demand side of commercial sexual exploitation, while at the same time protecting the victim and ensuring constitutional protections for those that are accused. This package of bills is no different. A few I'd like to highlight briefly. House Bill 2174 ensures that victims of human trafficking are afforded the same protections as victims of other sexual offenses under Chapter 31 and prohibits the introduction of evidence that could further re-victimize human trafficking victims and discourage other victims from testifying, which is absolutely critical. 2175 will strengthen the ability of prosecutors to combat sexual violence throughout Pennsylvania by permitting experts to testify about the dynamics of victim behavior. And for those that have never prosecuted a case in court, you may not understand the absolute critical nature of being able to bring an expert in to explain to jurors and judges about a world that they will never, most often never understand, see, or believe even exists. And lastly, House Bill 2176 provides for the expansion of a crime, unlawful contact with a minor, to crimes including human trafficking, which without question will strengthen the ability of police and prosecutors. Simply put, we certainly, as prosecutors, support this package of bills. It's an honor to stand here with so many people that care tremendously about this issue, and I think that this will put us in a much better position to move forward to not only convict those accused, but also to protect victims. So thank you very much.
Thank you, District Attorney Sunday. We talked a little bit about how we find the victim, what their experience has been, particularly on the criminal side. But I think it's also important that we talk about what kinds of programs and what help is there for once they've been identified. For that, we're going to ask Jennifer Storm to come up. She's our state victim advocate, to share what is being done to help and what more can be done going forward.
to lower this. I have to comment for a moment that this is one of the best turnouts I think I've ever seen at a victim-oriented press conference. And so I want to give it a round of applause to the House and the leadership in the House, because this is absolutely amazing. My hope is that those that are watching at home see this level of support and this level of dedication and commitment from our legislature, and to know that there are resources and services available. Hopefully what people see on the 5 o'clock news is not just strength in leadership, but hope, that there is healing and there is hope. I am Jennifer Storm, the victim advocate for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And again, I want to thank all the tremendous leaders here today, those who have not spoken yet and those who have already spoken. What we're discussing is a package of bills that was not only a collaboration among these members, but truly a collaboration with government and survivors. As a state, we have really revitalized the way we approach victims of human trafficking in our definitions, in our legal tools, and in services. We have been brought here by the courageous voices of trafficking victims and survivors who have been willing to share their stories with us and to teach us about what is needed. As you've heard, these are conversations that weren't really had before. There wasn't really an understanding of human trafficking for a very long time in Pennsylvania, and it took these horrific stories to come to the surface, to meet with advocates, to feel safe enough to disclose, to identify themselves as a victim, that they're even comfortable enough to walk into a shelter or a victim services agency. And then it was those stories that were then taken to these amazing leaders, and then we have now all of these laws. We realize we still have a long way to go, and that's why we're here today. But because of the legal changes that we have made, over 600 human trafficking victims have now been identified on average every year in the state of Pennsylvania. The bravery of those survivors aided in identifying 215 traffickers and 101 trafficking businesses. We recognize, again, that this is not a full representation, and our walk to justice is long. The path we tread bears light on those who have come before us, those who wrote Act 105, giving us those definitions and tools to combat and name human trafficking for what it is. Those who ratified Act 130, giving us safe harbor laws for children. And I think the DA illustrated that so beautifully, that these are individuals that we would once look at as criminals, as justice-involved individuals. And what we're starting to do is peel back the layers of trauma and actually expose the real evildoers, which are those that would seek to abuse, harm, rape, manipulate, and truly traffic and enslave individuals. The Commonwealth has recognized, however, that we do have more work to do, and that's why we're here. We're here to craft a more trauma-informed justice system. We must consider the weight of crime and the effects on victims and communities. Reclassifying the trafficking of infants to a first-degree felony is an appropriate weight to have. We must consider the burden on victims when they come forward to testify and combat their traffickers with the truth. Barring a victim's past from being used against them in court and allowing other expert testimony to underscore the suffering they have endured, that is how we establish a trauma-informed system. We must consider, too, the justice system that we place offenders into and provide our state partners the ability to rehabilitate and restore communities when it's possible. Counseling programs for incarcerated sex offenders is a no-brainer. Consideration of human trafficking convictions when establishing child custody not only protects families, but it also provides a better chance of success for those offenders when they re-enter society. As you have been told, January is Human Trafficking Month, and while we all stand here proudly wearing blue to create awareness, we must realize that this awareness and vigilance is needed every day. If you suspect human trafficking in your community in any way, shape, or form, or if you or someone you know or love is suffering under these horrific conditions, there is help. Please call 1-866-958-4519. You will find wonderful advocates that are there. They're compassionate. They're willing to walk you through these processes that can seem very scary. I want to thank this leadership again and this amazing turnout. It's such an honor to stand here with you all today. Thank you.
Mentioning that we're a week and a few days away from the Super Bowl, which sadly many experts say is the world's single largest event of human trafficking every year. So while many of us are celebrating the football game in our comfort of our home, the victims will not have that same opportunity. So while we are not in Miami, we can in fact do our part to make a highlight some of the numbers that our speakers shared. 600 identified, 300 of which came from the 15 corridors. We are barely scratching the surface on what is a huge societal problem. I want to thank Chairman Kaufman for working and running the bills out of committee. And I want to briefly ask the prime sponsor of the bill to raise your hand in case the reporters have any questions. They can follow up with you. Visit with these folks, talk with them. They can get into the details and in the weeds on their individual bills, and we'll be happy to answer any questions on this topic here after. So I want to thank everybody for coming. Most importantly, you're helping raise awareness on this very, very important issue. Thank you.